And tonight we're going to be talking about the lives of three romantic composers, Clara Schumann, Amy Beach, and Florence Price. So we're just going to jump right in. When we look at the Romantic period, we see that it was a time of great creative outpouring. It was an era of history which produced some of the greatest expressive works and masterpieces that we have today. It was also a time when society began to idealize the male artist genius. The Romantic artist genius, as opposed to the 17th century court or church musician, was a creative individual whose calling in life was to produce art for art's sake. Often the artist genius was a hero figure because of his ability to overcome insurmountable difficulties, which were at odds with his creative calling. Beethoven, we know, went deaf, Brahms was paralyzed with fear to compose, and Schumann lived much of his life in and out of mental institutions. But we often neglect to study the many female artistic geniuses of this period. This paper seeks to bring to light the lives of three women composers, Clara Schumann, Amy Beach, and Florence Price, who were musical prodigies, and to compare the struggles they had to overcome in their personal lives in order to produce original works of art. Tonight we begin with Clara Schumann. Much is known and written about Clara as the child prodigy, as Schumann's wife, and as the friend of Brahms. However, what is often overlooked is the incredible musician and composer that she was in her own right. Clara lived in the Victorian era when women were not encouraged to pursue serious musical study. Girls were taught music only as a hobby and as an attractive trait for marriage. In general, a woman's role was to be domestic and to take care of all matters relating to the family. If a woman was a prodigy, as Clara proved to be, she was tutored in music at home, and her performing career was promoted by her male relations, who would arrange all of the performing engagements, travel with her, and handle all of the business transactions of the performance, including her compensation. While women performers were few during this time, women composers were even less common. The societal view of a woman was that their mental capacities were very physically different than that of the male. Women were emotional with a large capacity for musical expression and lyricism. However, they lacked the rational conceptual male mind, which understood musical form, how to fit voices together in a polyphonic setting, as well as the structures of harmony and the imagination to display thematic development. As a result of these beliefs, women composers during this time were viewed as being imitators more than originators. These views were held by men and women alike, who debated these differences both privately and publicly. It is because of such circumstances that it's interesting to analyze Clara's early musical education and influences. Her education was started at birth in the musical environment of her home, where her mother was a pianist and soprano, and her father a piano teacher. However, Clara's formal musical education, beginning at the age of 5, was a result of her father's extreme confidence in his own teaching abilities, and his belief that Clara's gender would be no obstacle to her professional performing career, despite the gender obstacles of the day. Her early education, therefore, was unusual because it was like that of a man's training, in order to prepare her to compete as a virtuoso. Her father emphasized ear training, note reading, the nature of chords and scales, harmony and voice leading, as well as independence of musical thought and ideas. Her early education in composition also came from her father as a part of this holistic education, because it was the tradition of the day that the great virtuosos would play one of their own works on their recital programs. By the age of 9, when Clara began to perform publicly outside of her hometown of Leipzig, audiences were impressed by her virtuosity, but they were more amazed by her musical development, because no girl of her age had ever composed before. In addition to her understanding of the forms and complexities of music, her father also educated her to understand music as a sensual experience full of touch and emotion. Every technical exercise and scale was put in a musical context. The result of this intense early education was that Clara was one of the most expressive performers and detailed interpreters of her day, and this was apparent in her compositions, which were free of busy passage work and full of beautiful melodic and harmonic lyricism and character. It is said that Clara was so meticulous about detail that every note played a special role in the execution of the phrase, so that one had to pay close attention to everything that the composer wrote, which included articulations, dynamics, tempos, and musical markings in order to bring out the differences of character. Many composers, including Liszt, Mendelssohn, and Chopin, knew of Clara's work by the time she was 18 and admired it, playing them in their own concerts. In fact, Paganini, as a result of having heard Clara's Opus 1, her Polonaise in E-flat major, predicted the 10-year-old's successful artist career and was amazed by her musical sensitivity. Chopin, too, was so impressed with the collection of character pieces by Clara that he took them away with him for study. Clara was also very familiar with the works of Bach, Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven, having studied them as well as the works of her contemporaries Schubert, Liszt, Chopin, Hummel, and Hertz. Throughout her lifetime, Clara was admired and sought out for her deep understanding of music composition and her ability to bring out musical complexities. Although Clara received many favorable reviews of her compositions, many which were published and frequently performed by others, Clara did not compose many works after her marriage to Robert. This lack of compositional output was partially due to her role as sole breadwinner and the mother of 8 children, but she also struggled with the fear that she lacked the originality and the ability to compose. In her biography, Clara Schumann, the Artist and the Woman by Nancy Wright, Clara is quoted as saying in her journal, "I once believed that I had creative talent, but I have given up this idea. A woman must never wish to compose. There never was one able to do it. Am I intended to be the one? It would be arrogant for me to believe that." That was something with which only my father tempted me in former days, but I soon gave up believing in this. May Robert always create, that must always make me happy. However, Clara loved to compose, and in her journal entries wrote of the joy of composing, the self-forgetfulness and the satisfaction of creative activity being able to live in the world of sound. Her husband fully acknowledged her talent and her lack of time to compose as well. In his journal, he comments that Clara has written a number of small pieces that show a musical and tender invention that she has never attained before. She cannot work at it regularly, and I am often disturbed to think at how many profound ideas are lost because she cannot work them out. Despite Clara's own self-doubt and fears, she composed her most successful work, her piano trio in G minor, Opus 17, in the summer of 1846. The trio was written during a particularly difficult time in her life when the family was away in Norderney seeking out a cure for Robert's depression, and Clara had just given birth to her 4th child. The couple was also getting over recent miscarriage. The trio is made of 4 movements in Allegro moderato, Scherzo, Tempo di Menuetto, and Andante and Allegretto. The first movement, the Allegro moderato, is in G minor, and it's in standard sonata allegro form of the Romantic period. The opening lyrical theme is in the primary key of G minor, and it is first heard in the violin and then picked up by the piano. It's made up of a descending leap of a 5th followed by an ascent up a minor 2nd and back down. This appoggiatura-like motive of the minor 2nd is known as the sigh motive and is often found in many Romantic works. The opening theme I would like to play for you real quickly. And it just goes like this. As the piece continues, a change of texture and a military-like rhythm signals that the transitional material has arrived, and soon after, therefore, ushers in the lyrical secondary theme in the relative major of B-flat. The secondary theme, while also lyrical, maintains momentum through its many syncopated rhythms and 8th-note passages in the piano. And here you will hear the secondary theme played by Mei Ling. After the exposition, there is a brief development, and a dominant pedal on D signals the return of the opening primary and secondary themes in the home key of G minor. Throughout the trio, Clara's command of form and the structure is evident, while her themes reflect the musical sensitivity and lyricism so characteristic of her own musicianship and of the expressive Romantic style. In addition, balance is often maintained between the instruments, and individual melodic ideas are passed from instrument to instrument. While both primary themes are melodic in nature, related melodic ideas are often spun off from the original themes and form characters which change minute by minute, from reflective to playful to commanding to full of angst. As a result, when performing her trio, and certainly her other works as well, we have to be sensitive to the importance of every marking in the score and take care to be as true as possible to the spirit of the music, bringing to life the characters that she intended. We know that she was the kind of composer who detailed every nuance and character to her liking. We also know that Clara had a difficult life and that motives such as the Saya motive could have been very personal for her. As we play her music, we are aware of the many feelings it conveys, including angst, sorrow, and joy. Above all, we know that Clara always wrote and played with the utmost expressiveness and musical sensitivity, and we can rally our use of tone colors and vibrato to bring this quality of her music to life. As we look back at Clara Schumann's life, we see her struggling to trust in her own capacity for creativity and to trust in her innate musical abilities for composition in an unsupportive environment. Despite these pressures, we see her finding the will to compose works in the male-dominated genre of chamber music, such as the trio in G minor. This is in addition to being a mother of 8, the sole breadwinner of the family, and dealing with Robert's ailing health. We would like to now play for you the trio, the first movement in G minor. Amy Beach, who's our next person we're going to look at, led a very privileged life. She would never be without money and would always enjoy the leisure time to devote to music. In addition, Amy Beach was born in 1867, and she did deal with the same gender attitudes as Clara. However, the women's movement in Amy's day served to make public the conversation about equal rights between men and women. Amy's challenges would be her status as an American-born composer and her musical path, which could be argued was shaped by the religious Protestant values of both her parents. Amy Chaney was born September 5, 1867 in New Hampshire, the only child of Charles Abbott Chaney and Clara Marcy Chaney. Her mother was an accomplished amateur pianist and a singer, and she recognized Amy's prodigious musical talents, such as Amy's perfect pitch and her ability to sing the alto and soprano lines of more than 40 songs perfectly before the age of 2. Amy also had an unusual memory, and without any piano lessons at age 4, she could play from memory hymns and works by Chopin and Beethoven that she heard her mother practicing on the piano. As a child, music came easy to her. She was able to improvise, master notation, and transpose without much effort. Amy first displayed her exceptional abilities as a composer one summer by composing 3 waltzes in her head away from a keyboard while visiting her grandfather in Maine. Amy was only 4 years old. Although Amy's mother nurtured her musical abilities, she was also a devout Protestant and nurtured her daughter's religious development as well. She worried that Amy would develop an arrogant and a prideful spirit that would affect her salvation if encouraged too excessively in music. Therefore, she began teaching Amy piano at the age of 6, but would restrict the number of hours that she could practice. Amy's mother always treated her many musical accomplishments as the normal occurrences of any child and requested that those around Amy not overly praise her. The positive aspects of this early environment was that her talents were allowed to develop naturally without any pressure or interferences from others. Unlike Clara Schumann, Amy developed a strong confidence in her own musical abilities that would remain throughout her life. Amy progressed in her early musical studies and learned very quickly. At the age of 7, she played her first public recital full of the works of Beethoven, Chopin, and Bach, as well as a waltz she composed herself. By the age of 8, the musical experts in Boston were counseling her parents to let her go to Europe to study, as was the custom of the day. A musician was not taken seriously until he had studied the great masters on European soil. However, after much thought, Amy's parents declined and enrolled her in a private school in Boston where they could watch over her education and her health. However, as a child, Amy's lack of European training did not prevent her from obtaining a well-rounded music education. Amy taught herself counterpoint, fugue, musical form, and orchestration by translating theoretical texts in German and French to English, writing out Bach fugues from memory to see how they were constructed, and reconstructing themes from memory that she had heard from concerts in Boston, comparing them to the original scores. In fact, Amy's only formal compositional instruction came from a few tutoring sessions in theory at Wesley College with the professor Junius Hill at the age of 14. Growing up, her professional performing career was a result of intense studies under the direction of well-known Boston masters Ernest Purbelow and later Carl Biermann, a student of Liszt. Amy gave her first concert at the age of 16 in Boston, which in turn resulted in many additional playing engagements. Amy's performing career, however, was cut short at the age of 18 when she married Dr. Henry Beach, a physician in Boston and a social elite. While Amy was a skilled pianist during the years of her marriage, she did not perform often in public. Her husband did not approve of her earning her own money, since he felt that he should be the sole breadwinner, and instead encouraged her to spend her time composing at home. Therefore, for many years, she performed only a few recitals a year, giving away all the proceeds to charity. As a result, it was widely debated whether or not Amy identified more closely with composing or with performing. However, upon the sudden death of Mr. Beach at the age of 66, Amy enjoyed a renewed musical performing career, touring with her works throughout the United States and in Europe. Regardless of whether Amy felt more suited to composing or performing, there is a virtuosic and a confident spirit to the music of Amy Beach. She was known for composing freely and using American folk melodies for no other purpose than that she thought they were beautiful. She was one of the first American composers of the New England school that felt that America could have its own romantic national style based on the folk material found in America. Finished in 1896, her symphony in E minor entitled The Gaelic Symphony was based on Irish Gaelic melodies common to the New England area. In addition to a large repertoire of vocal pieces and a symphony, she is the composer of string chamber music, chamber works for violin and piano, and a mass in E-flat. Amy Beach's style is heavily influenced by the works of the Romantic composers such as Brahms, Rachmaninoff, and Liszt, while also having several unique elements. Her musical signatures include her trademark trill, her use of chromatic scales, and use of octaves for orchestral effect. Her harmonies are extremely chromatic and have rapid changing tonal centers, which is most likely an influence of Berlioz's treatise on harmony. Amy Beach often uses fluctuating tempos and changing rhythm within a single work for contrast, using a 2-against-3 hemiola rhythm. She is also known for uneven grouping of rhythm and for rhythmic freedom in melodic or cadenza-like writings. Her textures often display the thick chords of Liszt and Rachmaninoff and an intricate use of counterpoint. She employs forms using multiple melodic ideas, harmonic roaming, a lack of thematic development, a lack of well-defined sections, and sonata form only in multi-movement works. Some of these traits can be seen in her Romance for Violin and Piano, Opus 23. The Romance is one of her most frequently played works and helped to win her popularity in Europe prior to her first tours there. It was written for the violinist Maud Powell and first performed at the Musical Congress of Chicago. The work is in ABA form and A major with one theme modulating through various key centers but closing on well-defined cadences. While it only has one theme, this theme expands and develops a harmonic figure built on a diminished seventh chord throughout the work through a series of chromatic settings. The main theme is first introduced in the beginning by the piano and then again with the entrance of the violin. This is the first theme of the Romance. Throughout the work, this theme is passed back and forth between the two instruments and even woven into the texture of the piano part. Furthermore, the harmonic rhythm of the work begins slowly but increases in intensity in the middle and final sections. A use of blocked chords and arpeggios in the accompaniment are similar to the piano textures of Liszt, in which the piano is being used in an orchestral manner. A heavy use of syncopation and hemiola shows the influence of Brahms in this work and serves to create a sense of musical tension from the beginning to the end. Amy's use of the trill and also cadenza-like writing in the violin part are evident in this work as well. The work is very virtuosic for both the pianist and for the violinist, who explores the entire range of the instrument. The Romance is emotionally full of ups and downs. There's a sense in the beginning of the A section that one is remembering something lost but something good. In contrast, the B section appears in a very fierce manner, as if suddenly remembering the intense helplessness and pain of the loss. This is the opening of the B section. As this section continues, the emotion of the music fluctuates between a sense of tranquility and intenseness. With the return of the A section, we once again hear the beginning melody, remembering better times, however in a more sorrowful and grieving manner. And as a result, in performing the Romance, the melody has to be carefully picked up by each instrument and passed back and forth in a very expressive manner. Furthermore, changes of tone colors and use of tempo by the performer are important in bringing out the different characters between the A and B sections. The work is also virtuosic, and so notes must be played in a sustained manner to the ends of the phrases. Certain liberties can be taken with the piece in regard to rubato. However, many tempo changes are written in rhythmically, and the performer must be careful to constantly feel the duple or triple pulse and to maintain the integrity of rhythm between instruments in order to preserve the musical tension and feeling of romantic angst. It is often debated that Amy Beach's compositional style is too much like that of the European masters due to her self-taught composition lessons and an early musically sheltered life. However, Amy never acknowledged being hindered by a lack of formal musical training, and her compositions show a firm grasp of form and techniques, as well as unique characteristics associated with her own compositional voice. It is also debated as to whether or not it was wise for her parents to shelter Amy and her musical gifts because of religious reasons. It is interesting to note that Amy did not belong to or attend a particular church until the death of her husband, Dr. Beach. It seems that Amy only became a devout Episcopalian shortly after his passing, and friends closest to her report that Amy attributed her strength to begin the second half of her musical career from her newfound sense of religious faith. And now I would like to play for you The Romance by Amy Beach. that Amy Beach was becoming a prominent performer and composer. Florence Price was born in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1877. Florence Price is known for being the first African-American woman to have a symphony premiered by a major symphony orchestra. Like Clara Schumann and Amy Beach, Florence Price grew up in a culturally rich home. Her mother was a formal school teacher and also a piano player, and her father was a dentist who ran one of the town's dental practices. Her mother was very involved in the arts community and was part of the middle-class social circle organized by William Grant Still's mother that helped to organize activities to promote African-American artists. Florence Price's artistic experience growing up was influenced by many experiences with African-American intellectuals and performers, as well as a comfortable home which was full of books, musical instruments, and records. Her parents were also religious, and some of Florence's early musical experiences were probably in the church. Florence received her first musical training from her mother in piano and gave her first recital, which included some of her own works, at the age of 4. She was also interested in composing at a very young age, and at 11 had already sold some compositions to a publisher. While Florence enjoyed a middle-class upbringing in Arkansas, Florence would not have been ignorant of the struggles that African Americans were experiencing. The election of President Rutherford B. Hayes in 1877 marked the decline in the advancement of African Americans after Reconstruction and barred them from the vote through illiteracy laws, poll taxes, and an institution of all-white primaries. This in turn left them without laws for protection, and in the South, this gave rise to racial violence and prejudice. Despite social conditions, Florence was one of the first African-American composers to be admitted into the New England School of Music in 1903, although her mother enrolled her as a Mexican student because of racial pressure. Although it was typical during that time that a woman's training would not have been as comprehensive as that of her male counterpoints, she took courses such as harmony and analysis, counterpoint and composition, and theory during her time at the conservatory. She also took advantage of many opportunities while at the New England Conservatory and was an avid recitalist as well as composer, composing some serious works, including a string trio, a symphony that was performed at the school. She graduated with honors in piano and organ performance in 1906 and became a professor teaching at Cotton Plant Academy in Arkansas, Shorter College in Little Rock, and then Clark University in Georgia. Throughout her life, she would compose 6 symphonies, 4 concertos, tone poems and suites for orchestra, 9 chamber works, 7 pieces for organ, 30 pieces for piano, 25 songs, 5 sacred works, and 4 arrangements. In 1926, Price migrated to Chicago with her husband, Thomas Price, and their children due to the rising racial tensions in the South. It was during this time in Chicago that Florence continued her education in composition, harmony, and orchestration with Carl Busch, Wesley LaViolette, and Arthur Olaf Anderson at the Chicago Music College and the American Conservatory of Music. Carl Busch was an expert in Indian music, and Wesley LaViolette was a theorist, lecturer, and jazz pianist. While in Chicago, Florence Price was also a regular in artistic gatherings in which artists came together to support one another and share ideas. Her most influential circle was at the home of Estella Bonds, the mother of Margaret Bonds, who provided a nurturing environment for the Chicago community of Black artists, which included the soprano Abby Mitchell and composer Will Marion Cook and William Dawson. Florence Price was also involved with the new music contingent of Chicago composers. This included Ruth Crawford Seeger, Henry Cow, Edgar Varese, Carlos Chavez, and Adolph Weiss, as well as art critic Alfred Frankenstein and poet Carl Sandburg. The influence of these artists, plus the rich musical heritage of the early 20th century, which included jazz, the blues, ragtime, swing, military bands, African American spirituals, and work songs, made popular by groups such as the Jubilee Singers, is evident in her compositional style, which takes classical European forms and interlaces them with melodic material based on African American idioms. It was difficult for Florence Price, as a woman and an African-American composer, to find conductors and publishers in Chicago who would take her work seriously and even look it over, because her style was influenced by African-American folk songs and melodies. However, she continued to compose in her own style, and in 1932 won the Wanamaker Music Composition Contest for her symphony in E minor in Ethiopia's Shadow in America. As a result, her reputation as a composer and a performer in Chicago grew, and in 1933, on June 15th, her symphony in E minor was premiered by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Throughout the rest of her life, her works would continue to gain prominence, being performed on the radio program Evening Concerts of Contemporary American Music in New York and by performers and groups throughout the U.S. A sample of her style as an American composer can be seen in two completely different chamber works for violin and piano entitled The Deserted Garden and Elfentantz, Dance of the Elves. The Deserted Garden is reflective of the European art song in that it uses a simple ternary ABA form, switching back and forth between D minor and F major, and employing simple, straightforward harmonies in the piano part, which serve to support the melody of the violin. However, the composition is also reflective of the African-American spiritual, as the melody uses a pentatonic scale and the Dorian mode, which serves to flatten the 3rd and 7th scale degrees common in spirituals. The title, The Deserted Garden, which likely alludes to the biblical story of the Garden of Eden, could be a reference to the loss of what perhaps could have been in her own personal life in some way, or within the larger context of the African-American experience. However, Florence Price never commented on the work. And although the details have been lost, her work, Elfentantz, was written while in Chicago for a violinist there. It is a lively work that is influenced by ragtime. Elfentantz uses the romantic form of the minuet, ABA form, in which the A and B material would have been completely different characters made up of different melodies, harmonies, and sometimes even instrumentation. This is the case in Elfentantz, where the A section is based on the highly structured rhythm of ragtime, and the B section is much more improvisatory. The A section of the piece is in D major, but travels to G major and then back to D major. The influence of ragtime in this section is immediately heard in the first measure and the oom-pa rhythms of the piano accompaniment, which emphasize beats 2 and 4, which Bob will now play for you. Furthermore, a 16th note ragtime motive is introduced in the piano and then passed to the violin and reappears over and over. This is the ragtime rhythm. In contrast, the B section, which we will play in a moment, is in the 3rd related key of the flat 6 or B flat, a completely different tonal area. This idea of contrast in the B section is carried on with the abrupt change of tempo to a slower andante and the change in the accompanimental texture, which becomes more polyphonic and lyrical in nature, breaking up the blocked ragtime chordal texture of the beginning and changing it into sweeping arpeggiated chords. Harmonically, the A section is much more straightforward, where the B section is more chromatic with a greater use of 7th chords. Therefore, the different elements of these two sections help us to bring out the differences of character between the bright, cheerful, machine-like ragtime character in the beginning with the more improvisatory, expressive, and reflective character of the middle section. What is also interesting is that the origin of the ragtime is the cakewalk, an African-American parody dance in which dancers would win a cake for the most outlandish displays of European dance steps, one of which would have been the minuet. Unfortunately, Elfentantz, like many of Florence Price's works, was never published and little is known about it. As a result, the manuscript is unedited and so at times hard to read, and often an educated guess is required in determining the name of the note or quality of chord. The manuscript is currently part of the Florence Price collection at the University of Arkansas and can be asked for upon request. In performing Florence Price's music, it is helpful to research traditional African American vocal and percussive practices. Spirituals, for example, are extremely expressive vocally and based on African vocal traditions in which there are different tone qualities and ornamentations. Therefore, notes are approached in different ways through glissandos, falling releases, bends, and dips. Spirituals also tell a story, and so every note has to sing. In the case of Elfentantz, which is not a performed work, it is important to understand the character of ragtime and that it was a machine-like and personal music which was meant to sound like the piano roll. The beginning of Elfentantz therefore should be played in a much more rigid character than the B section, which is more free. The entire work is also based on a parody dance, so the character should be light and fun throughout. Musical jokes such as the distorted rhythm of the ragtime motive at the end of the piece should be emphasized to the audience. And our last pieces tonight will be In the Garden and Elfentantz. Betty Friedan once said that the only way for a woman, as for a man, to find herself, to know herself as a person, is by creative work of her own. There's no other way. Clara Schumann, Amy Beach, and Florence Price illustrate this statement well. Each woman lived challenged by the social limits of their time as well as by personal obstacles. And yet, each proved that they were intelligent, resilient, and courageous enough to continue to create and develop their own unique musical voice. For Clara, this meant daring to compose and share her music with others. For Amy Beach, her love of music from infancy drove her to educate herself and to once again perform late in her life, sharing her works with audiences across the globe. For Florence Price, the rich musical heritage in which she felt called to share gave her the strength to continue to write in her own style, uncompromised and true to her own creativity. In the words of Maya Angelou, a bird doesn't sing because it has answers, it sings because it has a song. And for these women, music was their core, who they were, and as a result, the world is richer for it. And thank you for coming tonight.